Welcome everyone to our next session on discovering happiness and through meditation and this insight meditation practice. I'm calling this one How to Escape Self-Judgment. Usually I call it radical self-acceptance, but for some reason I thought I'd emphasize the thing that we're often trying to escape when we're emphasizing acceptance. And I think the thing that many of us are trying to escape is self-judgment. Seems to be a lot of self-judgment. I know I went through a lot of self-judgment in my life growing up, and I think perhaps it's an aging thing that we perhaps judge a little less. I don't know. I know as a teenager there was a lot of self-judgment. I was never okay. That kind of spilled into my 20s and 30s, and took a lot of Dharma work to kind of realize that, yeah, I'm actually okay just the way I am. As Suzuki Roshi says, you're perfect just the way you are, but you could use a little improvement. So it doesn't mean we stop kind of looking at ways to I guess the word could be improved. Coming to a group like this might be one of those ways. We connect with our inner essence, our true nature. So that's a way that we can be a light in the world. So I'm looking at this as one of our greatest blocks to happiness, this kind of relentless self-judgment that we may be involved in, this notion that there's something wrong with me that needs fixing. You may have heard some teachers call this the trance of unworthiness. Folks like Tara Brock have used that phrase. They call it a trance for good reason. We're just kind of caught in this trap, in this belief that we have to continually improve ourselves. The self-help section of the bookstore is usually, when we had bookstores, right? It was usually one of the biggest sections. So I want to look at in this talk about how accepting ourselves just the way we are is so key to our happiness. So I want to talk about what self-acceptance is and what it isn't. I want to talk about why it's important to happiness, and then a couple of practices that we can engage in to evoke this within ourselves, to kind of evoke unconditional acceptance and love for ourselves. So what is it? What it is and what it isn't? It isn't complacency or resignation. It's not giving up. It's not approving of unjust situations. And when we say accept everything as it is, sometimes these fears come up in the mind that, does this mean I have to accept like unjust situations, that I'm going to give up and become a doormat because I'm just accepting things as they are. So this isn't what it is. Doesn't equal acceptance, doesn't equal giving up or complacency. So taking a non-judgmental stance can actually result in wise action in your life. So what do I mean by wise action? When you accept what's already happened, you're in a place of balance and clarity to then act and influence what comes next. So if you really think about it, when you're doing this amazing thing called awareness, you're only aware of what's already happened because you don't know what's happening next. So if a thought comes up, you're aware of a thought. Well, the thoughts, by the time you're aware of it, the thought's often gone unless it's a juicy one, right? And it grabs you and pulls you on down a train of thought. But for the most, you're just aware of things after they've happened. Right? They might feel like you're in the midst of them, but as soon as you're aware of it, remember it's happening. So any resistance to it is just struggling with what's happened in your life. Thought comes up, oh, the self-judgment thought, oh, that's a terrible thought, oh, but it just happened. You accept that it happened, and then you can go, oh, I don't need to believe that thought. It's just a thought, and I can then move on into wise action. In a way, just being aware and accepting everything that's happening shifts, it enables you to shift the causes and conditions to what happens next. I hope you really follow this, because it's so key to getting this notion of accepting things as they are, and accepting self-judgment, including self-judgment as it's occurring, enables you to respond in a wise way. You respond to the situation at hand rather than from old habit patterns. And when you're unaware, you're just reacting. I won't call it responding. You're just kind of reacting to things. Anger, frustration, impatience. We've all been there. We've all had those days. You're just in this brain seems to be the mind seems to be in this reactive state. And you see how it feels and how out of control it feels. So this is kind of the opposite of that, where we're very aware and we're just accepting what's unfolding moment to moment. It's consciously knowing what is happening moment to moment and being okay with it. Couldn't be any other way. It couldn't be any other way. And if we reject what's happening in the present moment, we're struggling with reality. And we're actually separating ourselves out from the whole. This notion of separation. And when you're separating yourself from the whole that's unfolding, you can't change the whole. You're not participating with the whole and floating. Folding, you're in a constant state of struggle, which is resulting in fear and anxiety, frustration, impatience, blame, and so on. There's a study, a 2019 study of cancer patients, and they found that patients that accepted their cancer had less general and cancer-related anxiety and distress. And those that hadn't accepted that this was happening had higher general and cancer-related distress. So it kind of gives you an idea of how we take this acceptance to whatever is happening. And self-acceptance doesn't mean you approve. So the second thing that it isn't doesn't mean we approve of all the unjust situations in the world or unjust events in your life. Perhaps someone experiences a childhood trauma. You acknowledge that this has happened and you accept the emotional pain, but you don't have to approve of the situation. So it's very important to have that context in mind. So these are important considerations to know what self-acceptance and acceptance generally, know what it isn't. So what is it? Well, it's accepting everything the way it is, the way it's unfolding, including any self-judgments that might arise. Carl Rogers was a psychologist many decades ago, developed a person-centered approach to therapy. And I love this quote from him. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And that's, for me, that quote just speaks exactly to what this practice is pointing to. Curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And then he goes on to say, I must accept myself as a decidedly imperfect person. whatever that means. So why is it important to your happiness? You could say that all spiritual traditions and all modern therapies actually include an element or emphasize self-acceptance. It's escaping from self-judgment. There's the acceptance and commitment therapy, which really emphasizes acceptance. Dialectical behavior therapy, which also emphasizes self-acceptance. Of course, the mindfulness-based practices of mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and so many others emphasize self-acceptance. And they're emphasizing it because it kind of breaks us out of this trap of anxiety and unhappiness that we perpetuate with this ongoing self-judgment. And it's much more than an affirmation of our positive qualities. It's much more than that. It's an acceptance of all the qualities, even the ones that we might not think are so esteemable or so what we label as positive. It's accepting everything, the entire package. It's total self-acceptance. Rachel Naomi Raymond, I don't know if people have ever read that. This is a book I read years ago, and it had a big impact on me. So I think I quoted a lot, but I don't know if this is still something that people read. Kitchen Table Wisdom. People come across that book still. Those who don't love themselves as they are rarely love life as it is either. Very key point. I'll repeat that sentence. Those who don't love themselves as they are rarely love life as it is either. Most people have come to prefer certain of life's experiences and deny and reject others, unaware of the value of the hidden things that may come wrapped in plain or even ugly paper. In avoiding all pain and seeking comfort at all costs, we may be left without intimacy or compassion. In rejecting change and risk, we often cheat ourselves of the quest. In denying our suffering, we may never know our strength or our greatness, or even that the love we have been given can be trusted. It is natural, even instinctive, to prefer comfort to pain, the familiar to the unknown, but sometimes our instincts are not wise. Life usually offers us far more than our biases and our preferences will allow us to have. Beyond comfort lies grace, mystery, and adventure. We may need to let go of our beliefs and ideas about love, about life, in order to have life. I don't know when that book was written. It's quite a while ago, but there's just the pages of wisdom in that book are amazing. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who died in the early 60s, echoes this by saying, we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. So again, this notion of acceptance, accepting things. And he really talks about accepting our shadow side. If you're familiar with Carl Jung at all, he talks a lot about how what we judge in others is actually a reflection of what we reject in ourselves. It's called projection or mirroring. And he says we really have to accept our shadow side and clearly see our shadow side. These kind of often hidden personality aspects that are hidden but drive our behaviors in the world, kind of unconsciously driving our behaviors. So when our shadow side, as he calls it, is unknown, then we're prone to particular behaviors, and we're prone to perceive personal deficiencies in others that are actually things we see in ourselves. And so when we can see the shadow side and accept it, and it no longer operates unconsciously. This is really the key. It's no longer hidden in directing our actions without us knowing. So what is accepting everything as it is? You know kind of what it isn't, you know why it's important. Let's talk about how it's experienced. So you can learn to recognize when you're kind of keeping yourself trapped in this trance of unworthiness. This is really what the practices that I'll be pointing to. I'll be giving you practices that illustrate how to uncover the aspects of yourself that you reject, and then practices that allow you to then accept them and recognize them and kind of free you from this trap of self-judgment. So you're in the process, you're accepting everything about yourself, about life and the world. And it goes back to Anthony DeMello and his "all is well" quote that I read last week. So when we judge ourselves, and I'll stick to that for the moment. I'll be moving on to others next week. But I'll stick to when we judge ourselves. We really what's the word? We enhance this trap of this trance of unworthiness. When we pull away from aspects of ourselves and we judge them, we're separating ourselves from the whole that we're most definitely a part. So self-acceptance is accepting absolutely everything about yourself. I mean, absolutely everything. And we had company last night. We were talking about this. It's kind of, I like to bring up, in random company, these kinds of topics just to sort of get how people think of these ideas. And some people would say, well, I don't know if I can accept everything. I'm still working on this aspect. And then I say, well, how long have you been working on it? Decades. So, well, how's it going? Not so good. I go, well, then what do you have to lose by just accepting that aspect of yourself? What you've been doing for 30, 40 years isn't changing it. And see what happens if just by accepting it, perhaps then it is allowed to shift. Allowed to shift, just accepting whatever it is. And I've told many stories in this group about different aspects of my personality that I've accepted and what that process looked like. So I won't go into that too much, but it can be a real process. And I had one aspect where a teacher said, I want you to go put yourself into situations where you really experience that which you're rejecting. So not only am I just accepting if it comes up randomly, I'm actually going out into the world and putting myself into situations where that aspect of myself that I'm rejecting is more likely to occur, so that then I can be with it and accept it. So that kind of speeds up the process, right? So say you're dealing with anger, and you get angry when you drive in traffic. Well, the practice would be to drive around at rush hour and on the busiest roads and watch anger arise, or frustration, or whatever this thing is you want to reject, and then just feel it. What's this feel like? What's it feel like in the body? What thoughts are arising that feed it? Just keep doing it. And if you do that every day for months, a month or two, you find that anger that arises in rush hour traffic is known and seen and really has no more power over you. You're not controlled by it. You're controlling it in a sense because you can simply be aware of it. So you can take anything that you're rejecting and put yourself into scenarios where you will feel it. That's the fast track to self-acceptance, right? You can also just wait till it kind of randomly arises and feel into it. But the nice thing about putting yourself into the situations, you can be very conscious about it over a period of time. And I've told the story here. Impatience was a big one that come up for me. And the teacher said every day on the way home from work, go to the grocery store and get into the longest line. And he asked me, well, when does impatience come up? And I said, well, grocery line's coming home from work. So he said, okay, here's your practice. Put yourself in that situation and just feel everything there is to feel about that emotional state that you're rejecting. I didn't like that I was impatient. I wanted to get rid of it. And all the strategies I was using to get rid of it weren't working. Like avoiding lineups, but inevitably I would come across situations where I would be in lineups. And anyway, I learned about impatience plus all kinds of other aspects of the personality that's in this being, things like entitlement and so on. So practice one. How am I doing here? Got time. I want you to really look deeply and discover what aspects of yourself you're rejecting. And you can sit and just kind of write them down. I had a student I worked with where we used an app, Google Keep. So we wrote them all down in Google Keep. And then during the day, if they came up and a self-judging scenario would come up and go, geez, I wish I didn't. Why do I still do that? Jesus, put it in Google Keep as another aspect. So you develop this kind of list, because sometimes if you just sit and write the list, you miss some juicy ones, because of course, what does your mind do? They're hidden, right? They want to keep them hidden. So you got to sometimes be on the lookout for them during the day. So write them down, piece of paper, electronic, whatever suits you. Because the first thing you have to do is be aware where you're judging and rejecting aspects of yourself. That's the first step. Just that knowledge of what you reject. And this is a thing that we often avoid doing for fear that we're going to uncover aspects of ourselves that will then make us truly unlovable and unworthy, right? So it's an exercise that some fear can come up around. But I invite you to engage with it as best as you can, what feels appropriate for yourself. So write down all the aspects of yourself that you would like to change. And so I brought this up at the gathering last night, and some of them went, I can't really think of anything right now. And I said, well, think of things that you judge in other people. Those are often projections to follow Carl Jung psychology. Well, they could all come, I judge the list just started flowing, right? They could think of things that they judge in other people. But so you could use that as kind of a mirror to reflect back on what you may also be judging within yourself. What you reject in others is often what you're rejecting in yourself. Okay, so you go through, once you get your list, you go through each one and say, need to change myself to be happy. I'm worthy. And just use this. First, it's a kind of an I'm worthy and lovable just the way I am. I'm simply deluding myself into thinking that I need to change myself just to be happy. And the second practice is this aspect that I was speaking about in terms of accepting everything around a particular feeling. So this would really be the A in the RAIN acronym: recognize, accept, investigate, and nurture, or non-identified, depending on which teacher you get it from. So the recognize and accept. So here, this is the A in RAIN. So you accept that this judgment's arising. And of course, many people in meditation, insight meditation practice will judge the judging. Why am I judging myself? Geez, I've gone to 16 Dharma talks on radical self-acceptance. And I still have these judgments. I should know better than to have these. So, that there's an aspect of yourself that you're rejecting right there, the fact that you still have judgments. So be notice as well that not to notice too and let go of these judging of the judgments when they arise. So let's say sometimes you get angry and then you judge yourself for getting angry. And this is on your list. Or he's angry. So this practice doesn't mean that you just, let yourself get angry and, throw the stapler at your partner or whatever it might be across the office, or, it's not what I'm pointing to here. We're not lashing out. Instead, we're recognizing that anger is present, first of all, and then we're holding it with acceptance and compassion. We're holding it. So we're accepting it just the way it is and holding it. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, we hold your anger like a mother would hold a baby. That image, for me, was really helpful. Being mindful and present to the emotion with compassion, just like you would comfort your own child. Holding the emotion like a mother or a father would hold a baby. So next time you find yourself rejecting an aspect of yourself, allowing yourself to completely hold the feelings that are associated with that. And acceptance of ourselves, of course, allows us to be more accepting of others in the world. So we'll open it up for any questions or comments, whatever's on your mind, whether you're on Zoom or in the room.
Thanks. Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure being here with everyone every week. And same when we're online. Such a precious treasure this weekend. Carl Rogers. Gotta love that guy. What he said, a good psychologist or whatever, they would have unconditional positive regard for the people. And Yeah, sure. So he had people that came in and said pretty nasty things to him sometimes. I really think that when you're in that, and I don't think he was, a Buddhist or anything. He had a chance to pawn this thing on himself. But that when you're in that space of unconditionality, you can go through your life thinking that about everyone. And I like what you brought up about the doormat thing, because you can't actually be a doormat either when you're in that space. Someone might have done something abusive for them. You can still disapprove of that thing, but still see them being caught as being someone who's really deeply suffering and caught up in causes and conditions. So yeah, I think the doormat thing was a really good thing to bring up. And I wanted to read a poem that I wrote that just really reminded me of.
Can you hear Jason on Zoom? Okay.
Okay, I'll speak loudly.
Some people are saying yes, and people are saying so. Here, I'll move.
It reminded me of it when you said that thing about the Thich Nhat Hanh quote, "Hold your anger like a mother holding the baby." It's called Meeting for the First Time. Every moment is this, so unknown that it can't be known. The maple tree in fall sheds no leaves, yet in spring they come back. So beautiful and precious. Toddler child, resting gently and safely in your arms. He trusts you and loves you, though you know nothing about him. When he cries out and wakes you, you must not recognize him, nor all of this. Unrecognizable. I take a sip of my morning coffee, bittersweet and hot, and I let it go, only because it will never come back to me. It holds me though. This is the only thing I know to be true. Thank you.
I'd be curious if this is this notion of accepting whatever's coming up is something that people have engaged with in their practice, and how it's gone. What challenges come up when we do this kind of practice?
Stephen?
Yeah.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the talk. Thank you, Jason, for the poem. So one thing that keeps on coming up for me, and you've heard me talk about this repeatedly, my top 10, my Billboard top 10 is I'm a bad person that's done bad things, that's hurt people. That's like on, over and over again. So for self-acceptance, the what comes up for me a lot is, well, I'll accept myself once I apologize to every single person in my life that I've ever wronged in one way or another. At that point, I'll be okay with myself. But until then, until I've done the confessional and gone into the booth and repented, that person that maybe I, the red light that I ran and could have hurt someone, whatever it is, it could be the most, random thing to the most specific thing. My brain goes, okay, once I have OCD. So one time I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy and I told the therapist about a certain situation. And I said, do you think I should apologize to that person? And she goes, well, like, I don't even know what her response was, to be honest with you, but I went and apologized to the person. And I thought, okay, that's going to be better, but it wasn't, because then my brain just went on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And so when does it ever end? So it is ideal, the notion of self-acceptance, but there's still a part of me that says, how can you accept yourself when you could have potentially hurt all those people? Apologize to them first, then you'll be good. Then we can move on. So that's a theme that comes up. I was triggered actually by this, by this talk, if I'm being honest. And that's a great thing. I mean, I think being triggered is the most wonderful thing ever. In my own practice, I'm triggered, or I see a lot of things come up, and that's a great opportunity. And I know as well, there's so much to it. There's conditioning, and there's societal things, and there's the brain that I'm born with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a great opportunity for me when I do experience this kind of discomfort. But I wish opportunities didn't feel so shitty anyway. It just kind of sucks, but is awesome at the same time. So I don't know if you had any tips on that. I just feel that if I went down that path, kind of, I haven't been to AA, but I think that's one of the steps. If I did in my brain go through that path, I feel like it would just be never ending. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, AA is one thing. And people that have gone through an addiction have often done some pretty harsh things to people. So that's why it's part of the recovery process. I think if you're coming to this meditation group every week, that you're likely not doing going out and harming people a whole lot. I mean, we can unconsciously, and we all do, in some level, harm people without the intention to harm people. So I would, notice those thoughts coming. I would not recommend that you go around apologizing to people. Probably the people you're apologizing don't even know what you're talking about most of the time, right? So that's your first clue that it's in your mind as opposed to in the world. It's a mind-made reality as opposed to a real world reality. So just notice it as a thought that like every other bizarre thought that our mind might produce. Because our mind does come up with some, crazy shit. And we can just kind of go, oh, there it is again. There's the wanting to apologize mind. In fact, you might want to call it that. Just kind of go, oh, there's that wanting to apologize mind again. Yeah, interesting. And what's it feel like, that wanting to apologize mind? No, it kind of feels heavy. It feels like this. Maybe it feels like it's some tension in this part of the body when wanting to apologize mind comes up. Maybe there's other thoughts that feed it. Wanting to apologize minds maybe followed by I'm not a very good person, I'm not worthy, thoughts coming up. So you can kind of look at how it snowballs into a conglomerate of self-judgment. But perhaps if you just notice it as wanting to apologize mind in the early stage, and just accepting that thought pattern for what it is, it may not snowball into deeper self-criticism.
Thank you so much. On that note, I'm noticing that it's something that I have to constantly remind myself of, because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. Obviously, this is one of the reasons I come here week after week after week after week. Even if we're having the same conversations, I think it's important for myself anyway to have that reminder. And I don't know too much about the Buddhist practices, but I do know that one of the things I believe I know one of the things that the Buddha says is to have the wise friends and the Sangha and stuff like that. And And to say the things in a non-judgmental setting is so important. So this is always beneficial for me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say in my long-winded way. So thank you again.
Yeah, we have had this conversation, but not in the sense of wanting to apologize, mind. That's a new one, and that may be an early indicator of what snowballs into these other mind states that you've brought up. Wanting to apologize, mind. So you can there's an element of self-forgiveness in that too, and just forgiving yourself for these mind patterns repeating. It's okay. I mean, this is just what is happening. There's an element of forgiveness, if you know what I mean, in that, so we can kind of go, oh, this is still around. That's why. Maybe we want to know why too, right? Psychotherapists love dipping into the why part. And for what that's worth, sometimes it's all that's required is awareness, acceptance, and moving on. And the why is not all that important.
Mm.
Just one thing I thought of with what Joanna said, and that brought me back to the Carl Rogers quote that you made about the paradox that if you accept yourself completely, then you can go on to change. But what we always do is the opposite. We have to think that we have to change everything about ourselves, and then we can accept. But it's the ego will just keep on finding new things that it needs to change in order to be happy. So I think it's kind of fun to look at it. Let's flip that around, because that's exactly the way that I think a lot of us operate. Maybe before we start coming to some of these contemplative practices.
That's an important point that Jason wrote. He said that the ego will continually look for things that you need to change about yourself, which is so true, because the ego has to struggle with what is in order to remain center stage. So no matter how many things you change about yourself, there's a new one that's going to come up. And it's just the egoic mind having to struggle. It's not a bad, it's just the process of this aspect, these processes remaining center stage. So it's just recognizing that. If you put, as you said, the changing yourself first and then accepting, you're never going to accept yourself, because the ego will always come up with something. That's why it's a trance or a cage, a prison. So we are a wheel, just continually keep thinking, oh, if I just change this aspect of myself, I'll be okay. If I change this aspect, I'll be okay. When in fact, it's just accept that this is what's unfolding in this moment due to all kinds of factors that genetics, environmental, societal, cultural, family, things you're not even aware of, factors. It's just, and they all just come to this moment, and that's what's arising. The ego wants to reject all that, try to control. One thing it thinks it really can control is you, me. Control and struggle. So it's accepting absolutely everything about yourself in this moment, and then in the next moment, and in the next moment. And they don't believe me. I'll throw a Buddha quote, a Buddha method out. Don't believe a word I'm saying about that, right? You know, you may be looking at me skeptically saying, geez, Stephen, I don't know. You know, tried a bit, I've dabbled in this, and then it's but don't dabble, like really set the intention to be with your experience.
Can I, Steve?
Yes.
Is it accepting ourselves or wanting to be accepted by others that we over try to change ourselves so that we can be accepted and liked by others instead of liking ourselves first? It's just an observation.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, that's the underlying the trap is seeking love, wanting to be loved, and thinking that we need to somehow change ourselves in order to be loved.
Should we not be working on our authentic self and looking at that and saying, is this who I really am? And accepting myself for that? Just a thought.
Yes. What do you mean by authentic self?
I really believe that sometimes society is trying to mold us into what they want, as opposed to being the true person that we are within and living in that group, as opposed to, no, you're not going to be good enough unless you have this kind of house, and you're not good enough unless you behave this way, you know. So I believe that we all have an authentic self that we can project and we can accept, right? Like, I'm happy with very simple life. I don't need all this stuff, right? But unfortunately, there's people around that, like belonging to a tribe, right? You're tribal and you want to belong. But I don't know. I just believe that you have to get to know yourself and as you said, accept yourself. Sorry, that's my thought.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to come at this. In terms of this phrase, authentic self, and can be taken in a few ways. Your authentic self can be considered who you are in this moment as a manifestation in the world, right? And that's about as authentic as you can get. That you can't be anything other than what you are in this moment in the world. The good, the bad, the ugly. It's all good. Not to put labels because it's all the same, but that's one way of looking at your authentic self. So in recognizing that that's all you can, that's what you are as a manifestation in the world, you're recognizing your authentic self. The other way that phrase can be interpreted is your authentic self is your deepest true nature, which is love and compassion, happiness, which is not what you're manifesting in the world necessarily, but what's your deepest nature. And when we go to awareness, we're trying to touch into that deepest nature. When we go to the heart space, that's a portal to our deepest nature. Our true nature, as it's sometimes called. So there's those two different ways, but both involve accepting ourselves just the way we are. We're accepting ourselves just the way we are as a manifestation in the world, and we're accepting ourselves just the way we are because we're an expression of God or the ultimate truth or whatever we want to, the absolute, whatever we want to call it. There's lots of different names for it, depending on the spiritual tradition. Yeah, so different ways to think of this authentic being.
Something that comes up for me is the same thing our colleague online was mentioning, the idea that my authentic self might kind of suck, you know? You mentioned entitlement, and that's something that comes up for me, and I can judge that a lot, and I don't always see it in the moment. It's usually that happens, and I go home, and I think about, oh, the way that I treated that person was not the way that I want to treat that person. That's not how I want to show up in the world. And again, if I could go back and apologize to them, but even that might not be skillful because they might not have even registered, you know? So yeah, all that to say, also a struggle for me, because some of the things about myself that I have trouble accepting are things that I really do think cause harm, you know? And I don't think it's always just my perception that it causes harm. So it's something about living in community that we want to be considerate of others. So I don't know. I like to think that if I accepted that about myself, that I would then be able to move on from it and not have that come up. But that's not been my experience. My experience is that I come, I think that I'm doing all right. And then something, an interaction will happen. I'll go home and I'll think, dang it, I didn't show up the way that I wanted to. So yeah, just to share that is also a struggle in my life. So.
Well put. It's beautiful when you put it. We get caught, right? So even if we're aware that this is something that we manifest in the world, we still get caught sometimes. And we get caught when we're unconscious. We get caught when if we're conscious of what's unfolding, and we're aware of what's arising, we don't get caught. So I guess, kind of the question that becomes, how do we be aware all the time? How do we be conscious? Because as unconscious egos, we're kind of insane little beings. Right? I mean, I'm not exaggerating, am I? Like, as unconscious beings in the world, we're pretty much insane. It's insanity. What goes on with, I mean, that's what it is, but it's kind of insanity. So the question, how do we become more conscious throughout our day, so we don't get caught, so that those ego aspects don't manifest in the world? It's practicing awareness. We meditate to practice. The way I look at meditation is it's time of the day to practice awareness so that I'm more likely to be aware during the day. As John Kabat-Zinn called it, sewing your parachute. Tuning your instrument. You want to go on the stage of life with an instrument that's tuned so you put out nice melodic sounds in the world rather than something else. So it's that idea of our formal practice, but then also when we do act in a way unconsciously in the world, that we're aware after the fact and go, oh, wow, I got caught there. But okay, I'm aware of it after the fact. We can be aware in the moment, or we can be aware that we weren't aware after the fact and just go, oh, wow, that's what being unconscious feels like. That's kind of what the Buddha was talking about. This is what suffering feels like. This is what the cessation of suffering feels like. And the patterns in your mind kind of get worn so that non-suffering sukha feels better than dukkha. So the practicing awareness, meditating in the morning, I would recommend, just to tune the instrument. Mindfulness bells throughout the day, just to wake up. And as at work, just a little, even a buzz, because bells are maybe not be appropriate in some work, but just a little in your pocket. random timer, a mindfulness bell. Oh, am I awake? Am I aware of what I'm doing in this moment? I did that for years. If I had a bong playing out my computer speakers, I had like stereo on in my office at the university, the bong, and everybody, everything, the whole floor would hear it. And they all go, I said, they asked me what it's for. And I said, so just to stop and go, what am I aware of what I'm doing in this moment? So then everybody said, yeah, I do that. I hear your bong, and then I go, yeah, I just stop. They're not meditators, but they thought that's really helpful, actually, just to kind of exhale, breathe, and just proceed consciously, even if it's for a few moments. And you just kind of pile up those moments of awareness until you're continuously aware. When you're continuously aware, it's very unlikely that you'll get caught in that way. So we're not judging, but we're looking at how we can, because of these things, not being aware, of course, is just arising based on causes and conditions as well. There's no use judging the fact that you weren't aware, but you can put causes and conditions in place that will make it more likely that you will be conscious throughout the day. That's all that's all we can really play with. That's what Dharma practice is putting in place causes and conditions to make it more likely that we act skillfully in the world, that we manifest skillfully in the world. And when we don't, we recognize, that's what happened. Next time it could be different. Thanks for that question. You kind of nailed right into the core of the issue.
I find one thing helpful too is to kind of have a sense of humor about the whole thing. Because these egos, the ego part of the mind is just such a, I've called it, it's like a little rascal kind of thing. Like it's this little guy or gal that just kind of like dislikes to kind of throw monkey wrenches. And I have found it helpful to keep, just to kind of keep that kind of a light touch and the sense of humor, almost be like a little bit foolish sometimes.
I'm not sure what I'm going to share exactly. Your talk stirred up so many different thoughts for me. Light touch and sense of humor is a good idea. I'm working with someone to do some emotional exposure therapy right now with some traumatic experiences from earlier in my life, and a lot of work seems to be just creating space where I can be more present with things that still have a hold on me and what's happening, and to go back and spend time with the things that still have a hold on you while being present with them until you have come to be present with them so much that you accept them and you no longer. So I've experienced this a few times through that work, but so I know that this is a helpful process, but it's still difficult and it takes more time than I would like, and I'm scared every time it's time to go back and do some of that accepting. And I guess I just find there's so much judgment tied up in all of it. Doing mindfulness work at the same time, it's interesting. It's interesting to me how much of it is the same practice for me, being able to be present with myself each day. It's the same work. I don't know exactly. I just have, well, your talk was really helpful to me. Finding my way through what it is to be present with myself and deal with the different thoughts and memories that come up in every day. Having a good sense of humor is also very helpful.
Thanks for sharing. It's yeah, I mean, when I talk about a lot of it is emotional exposure therapy, right? It's at a certain level. It's accepting the emotions as they come up, see how they feel, bodily thoughts that are arising with them, and bringing, I think, if we're dealing with trauma, bringing the real sense of self-compassion with it too, like going at a pace that feels appropriate in terms of, embracing these emotions. I used to tell people, just dive right in, because that's my personality, right? I dove into my trauma and just embraced all the emotion that allowed me to process it. And therapists all said, like, you're a therapist's dream, like you just. But I know it took me a while to realize that not everybody is like that. And so it's more of an approaching. And more of a gradual approaching, and that's fine too. I mean, that's what's unfolding. And with the gradual approaching, you might find that there's moments where there's big openings that occur that allow you to move right in and embrace the difficult emotions that arise in the present moment that come from, from repressed trauma in the past. It's all operating under the surface in many cases. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So the self-compassion, the sense of humor, lightness, and the self-compassion allows us to be gentle in our approach to it. Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see you all. And we'll see what happens for next week. Be more on the same theme.